understand, in order to have a clear understanding of what is the contract for sale of goods, buyer, seller, and goods. So who is a buyer? The Sale of Goods Act defines a buyer as a person who buys or has agreed to buy goods. Similarly, who is a seller? A seller is someone who sells or has agreed to sell goods. Okay, I repeat once again. A buyer is someone who buys or has agreed to buy goods. A seller is someone who sells or has agreed to sell goods. So what is the difference between these definitions given in the Sale of Goods Act and the general terms of buyer and seller that we use? The only difference is, see, in common language, we say buyer is someone who has bought goods, whereas the law says buyer is someone who has bought goods or who has agreed to buy goods. Similarly, in common terminology, we say seller is someone who has sold goods, who sells goods. But in this act, seller is someone who sells goods or who has agreed to sell goods. That is the difference. So that is the definition of buyer and seller. 1 minute. Yeah. Next definition is goods. What do you mean by goods? The Sale of Goods Act says that every kind of movable property other than actionable claims and money, right, is constituted as goods. So stocks, shares, growing crops, grass, timber attached to or forming part of the land, all of that constitute goods, right? Now, goods are of 3 types, right? Existing goods, future goods, and contingent goods, right? According to the Sale of Goods Act, goods are 3 types. Now, what is the existing, future, and contingent goods? Again, existing goods again can be classified into 3 types: specific goods, ascertained goods, and unascertained goods. Okay, so let us try to understand what specific goods are. Specific goods are those goods which are identified and agreed upon when the contract of sale is formed. That means at the time of forming of the contract of sale, at that time itself, the goods are identified and agreed upon. So, for example, see, I have a sofa at home, right? I have one specific sofa at home which I want to sell. So, I show the sofa to somebody and say, see, I am no longer interested in using this sofa. I want to sell it. Do you want to buy? So, the sofa that I want to sell is very clearly identified. It is agreed upon. There is no confusion as to which sofa it is. There is only one sofa which is specifically showed to the buyer, and I tell the buyer, see, this is the sofa that I want to sell. That is an example of specific good. Right? Now, coming to ascertained goods. What are ascertained goods? This term ascertained goods is used for those specific goods which have been selected from a larger set of goods. For example, there are 500 apples, and out of those 500 apples, I decide to sell 200 apples. And in order to sell these 200 apples, I have separated these 200 apples and I have specified, see, these are the 200 apples out of this larger group of 500 apples that I want to sell. So these 200 apples that I have ascertained, I have identified from that larger group, that is known as ascertained goods. Now, coming to unascertained goods. What are unascertained goods? Those goods that have not been specifically identified. Again, same example. I have 500 apples. In earlier case, in case of ascertained goods, what did I say? 200 apples. I have identified. I have separated. But assume I have not identified. I have not separated. Then it becomes unascertained good. So I have a bunch of 500 apples with me. I say out of these 500, I will sell you 200 apples. Which 200? I have not specified. I have not identified. So in this case, they become unascertained goods. So existing goods are of 3 types: specific goods, ascertained goods, and unascertained goods. Coming to future goods, these goods are those goods which would be which are not in existence at the time the contract of sale is made. They would either be manufactured or produced or acquired by the seller at a future date. So, for example, I enter into a contract with somebody saying that, I will manufacture 100 pieces of table and sell them. So those 100 pieces of table are not there right now. They are still in the undergoing the manufacturing process. Once the manufacturing process is over, then those 100 tables would come into existence. So such kind of goods are known as future goods. Contingent goods are also a type of future goods. Now, these goods are part of a sale contract that has some contingency clause in it. For example, I have a farm which grows apples. So I say, I have 10 acres of apple orchard. I say, what all the apples that would grow in this orchard, I will sell it to somebody. Right? Now, apples might, do I know how many apples would grow? I don't know. Right? I don't know, and what will be the condition of that? I don't know right now. It depends on future weather conditions and things like that. So this is an example of contingent goods. See, yesterday's class we discussed about bailment. We discussed about pledge. So I told you what are that bailment, pledge. These are all special types of contracts. Now, one topic that you have in your syllabus is trying to understand what is the difference between a sale and a bailment. See, bailment has two parties involved in it. Sale also has two parties involved in it. But the parties involved in bailment are called as bailer and bailee, whereas the parties involved in a sale are called as seller and buyer, or vendor and purchaser. Right? Then bailment is only with respect to movable property, whereas sale can be in respect of movable or immovable property also. Right? And one very important thing is, in case of bailment, the goods are delivered by the bailer to the bailee for a certain purpose. And the goods have to be used by the bailee only for that particular purpose as per the instructions given by the bailer. So if the bailer says you have to keep it here, he has to keep them there. If the bailer says you have to repair them, he has to repair it. If the bailer says you have to paint it, he has to paint it. So a bailee can use the goods only as per the instructions of the bailer. Whereas, what happens in a case of sale? The property is transferred by the seller to the buyer. Now, the buyer is the owner of the goods and he can use them as and how he wants. Right? Now, bailment could be a gratuitous bailment or non-gratuitous bailment. Gratuitous bailment means bailment which has some consideration involved in it. And non-gratuitous bailment is bailment without any consideration. So, bailment could be for some consideration or without consideration, whereas sale always requires consideration. If there is no consideration, there is no sale. Right? And then another point of difference is ownership. Transfer of ownership does not take place in bailment, whereas transfer of ownership takes place in the case of sale. And in bailment, registration is not mandatory. But whereas in sale, if it is sale of immovable property, then it must everything has to be in writing. Then this is important. What are the differences between sale and agreement to sell? Right? In sale, there is transfer of ownership. Right? Sale results in transfer of ownership. That means ownership is transferred from seller to buyer. Whereas in an agreement to sell, there is no transfer of ownership. Right? So, sale creates a jus in rem. Agreement to sale creates a jus in personam. Jus in personam means it allows either of the party to take legal action against the other person. Right? So that is one thing that you need to remember. Sale results in transfer of ownership, whereas agreement to sell does not result in transfer of ownership. Right? Now, in sale, if the purchaser does not pay for the items, what the seller can do is seller can ask for the purchase price. He can file a lawsuit in order to recover the purchase price. Right? Whereas in an agreement to sell, take for example, the purchaser refuses to take delivery of the goods, refuses to pay for the goods. What is the option available to the seller? The seller can only bring the claim for damages. He cannot recover the purchase price. Right? Similarly, in a sale of agreement, if the seller breaches the sale of agreement, that means seller has entered into an agreement to sell that he will sell, but now he is refusing to sell. What can the buyer do? The buyer can only claim for damages. Why? Why is it that the buyer can only claim for damages? Why is it that the buyer cannot demand for the items? Because in a agreement to sell, the seller is still the rightful owner of the items, and he can dispose them of in whichever manner he wants. But in a sale, if a sale has been an sale contract has been entered into, and then the seller breaches it, the buyer is now the owner, right? He can claim for the items, he can recover, he can demand for the actual items because it is he who is the owner. And one more very important point of difference between sale and agreement to sell is, in an agreement to sell, if the products are destroyed, irrespective of where they are with the buyer, they are with the seller, or they are in transit, wherever they are, right? The seller is responsible for the loss, right? It is the seller who has to bear the loss. However, in sale, wherever the products might be, with the buyer, with the seller, in transit, or wherever they might be, it is the buyer who is responsible for the loss, right? So, to put it in simple words, whenever products are destroyed, who will bear the loss? It is the owner who will bear the loss. So, in sale, who is the owner? The owner is the buyer. Whereas in an agreement to sell, who is the owner? Seller is the owner. So, it is very simple. Then one more topic that you need to understand is what is the difference between sale and hire purchase, right? What happens in sale? The buyer gets ownership of goods at the time of entering into the. See, what exactly is hire purchase agreement? Hire purchase agreement is a hirer or a buyer enters into an agreement and enters into a contract wherein he pays the amount in equated monthly installments. He does not pay the entire amount in one go. He pays in equated monthly installments, and at the end of completion of the entire payment, then he becomes the owner. So when a person cannot afford to pay the entire amount in one go or cannot own the product, they go into hire purchase agreements. So what is the difference between a sale and a hire purchase agreement? In a sale, buyer becomes the owner of the goods immediately at the time of contract itself. Whereas in a hire purchase, the buyer here is called as the hirer. Hirer gets the ownership only after the last installment, right? And then once a contract in sale, once a contract is made, once a contract is entered into, the buyer should pay the money that is mentioned in the contract. Whereas in case of a hire purchase, the buyer or the hirer, he can terminate the contract anytime before the last installment if he wants to. Take, for example, he is no longer in a position to pay. He can terminate the contract then and there itself. Just a second, 1 second. It is not moving. Yeah. Okay. Now let us try to understand what is price. Now this is a very important component of the sale of goods act. So price is the monetary consideration. Price is the monetary consideration or the value decided for the sale of goods. Whatever is the money aspect involved in that contract, that is nothing but price, right? Now coming to ascertainment of price. Ascertainment of price means determining the price of a commodity. How do we determine the price of a commodity? So the Sale of Goods Act has specified the process of ascertainment of price under 2 sections, section 9 and 10. Let us try to understand what they are. Right? So section 9 talks about ascertainment of price in the contract itself. Right? So X and Y enter into a contract. such that X sells his house to buy for 50,000 rupees. The price is mentioned in the contract itself, right? So that is price is explicitly mentioned there, right? Sometimes it could be mentioned in the contract itself that price would be ascertained at a future date, at some other date, and there would be some authority who would ascertain that price. That also is possible, right? And sometimes price might not be mentioned in the contract, but if there are two people, a buyer and a seller, who have a long history of dealing with one another. For example, there is a college, there is an educational institution. They regularly buy stationery from one particular stationery shop, right? So even if the price is not clearly mentioned in the contract, it can be determined from the previous history. So take for example, every time the college buys bundles of A4 size paper from that stationery shop. So every time the price need not be mentioned. The price can be determined from whatever previous dealings have been done between that institution and the stationery shop, right? And one more important aspect in section 9 is, if it says, okay, if price is not mentioned, if price is not, if the contract does not talk about who will ascertain the price, or if there is no past history of dealings between the buyer and the seller, then what? Then the buyer will have to pay the seller a reasonable price. And this reasonable price will have to be decided in accordance with the market value, whatever is the prevailing market value, right? Now, I told you there are two sections, section 9 and section 10, right? Coming to section 10, see, this method of determining the price is by a third party, right? Now, if both the parties have decided that, the price will be decided by a third party, and if the third party is not capable of doing it or refuses to make a proper valuation of the goods, then what will happen to the agreement? The agreement will become void. This is one scenario. That is, they entered into an agreement saying that a third party will decide, but now the third party is not deciding, is not able to decide, then the agreement becomes void. Sometimes, see, the third party might be prevented from doing its job by either the seller or the buyer. Then, whichever party is at fault, that party will have to pay damages to the other party. For example, the third party has come to us. Take for example, some quintals of rice are being sold and bought. So there is a third party which will come to determine or ascertain the price of the rice. But the seller is not allowing that party to do its job. Then the buyer can sue the seller for damages. Okay, that is about ascertainment of price. Next, coming to conditions and warranties. What do you mean by conditions and warranties? See, whenever there is a contract of sale, whenever contract of sale is being made by buyer and seller, they make certain representations. That means they make some statements. If, for example, I am selling my house, so I will say this is a very good house, this is a very strong house, the quality of construction material that we used was very good, and things like that. This house has perfect vastu or whatever it is. So all these statements are representations that I am making as a part of this contract of sale. These representations are known as stipulations, right? They're known as stipulations. Now, these stipulations could either be conditions or warranties, right? So, what are conditions or warranties? Conditions or warranties are representations that are made by the buyer or the seller at the time of contract of sale. Now, when do these stipulations become conditions and when do they become warranty? Let us try to understand. A condition is a stipulation which is essential to the main purpose of the contract. That means the very essence of the contract. Condition is a stipulation which is essential to the main purpose of the contract. And if this stipulation does not hold true, if this stipulation does not hold true, then the other party can terminate the contract. Right? So take for example, if my house is 50 years old, but I tell the other person that my house is only 20 years old. Now this representation, this stipulation is a condition. The seller, the buyer can refuse the contract and say, no, when you told me that it is 10 years old, I paid the advance, but now I found out that it is 50 years old. Now I will terminate the agreement. Now you have to give me back my advance. So that is what is a condition. What is a warranty? A warranty is a stipulation which is collateral. That means along with them, it is the main purpose of the contract. It is not essential to the main contract, right? If this warranty is not fulfilled, if there is a breach of this warranty, then what the aggrieved party can do is the aggrieved party can claim damages, but they cannot reject the goods or they cannot terminate the contract, right? Both conditions and warranties are of two types: express conditions and warranties and implied conditions and warranties. So an express condition is something that is clearly written. So you go to buy a particular television, so the model number is given. So that is a express condition. In case the shopkeeper tells you that I am selling you 2020 model TV, but he sold you 2019, then you can reject it, right? And guarantee for 5 years. For example, products have guarantee for so many years. That is a warranty, right? And if that is clearly written on that bill, that is an express warranty. Anything that is clearly written somewhere, that is an express condition or an express warranty. But many a times, conditions and warranties are not written anywhere. They need not be mentioned. They are implied. That means they have to be present. Again and again, they need not be written or told anywhere. They just have to be present. So let us first try to look at some of the implied conditions. What are some of the implied conditions? Some of the implied conditions are condition as to title. What is this implied condition as to title? So take for example, I go and tell X, I want to sell my house to you for 50,000 rupees. Will you buy it? What is the implied condition? The moment I come forward to sell something, there is an implied assumption that I am the rightful owner of that house. That is an implied condition. Nobody needs to cross-check it. The moment a seller is coming forward and saying that, I want to sell something, it is assumed that he has complete ownership of that. So tomorrow, I tell X that, I want to sell this house, but X finds out that, I am not the actual owner of the house. Then X can terminate the contract. X can say, no. So I can't say tomorrow, when did I tell you that I am the real owner? No, without being the real owner, you cannot actually come for any kind of a sale agreement, right? That is condition as to title, a very, very important condition. Next, condition in case of sale by description. That means whenever goods are sold by description, then there is an implied condition that the goods shall correspond with description. See, when you're buying something on Amazon, when you're buying something on Flipkart, do we actually get to see the product? No, we don't get to see the product. We only get to see a picture of that product and a description of the product. The website gives you the description of the product. So here, sale is being done on the basis of description. So what is the implied condition here? That the final goods shall correspond with the description. Whatever was described in the website, the same kind of good or product should be sent to me. If no, I can terminate the contract. Next one, condition in case of sale by sample. So sometimes what happens, initially a sample is sent. After the buyer okays the sample, then the complete product is sent. So that is known as sale by sample. there are three very important conditions that are applicable for sale by sample. What are the conditions? The final goods must correspond with the sample in quality. So I'm selling rice. I send some sample. A person has ordered for 200 kgs, 300 kgs of rice. Whatever sample I showed to that person, the final goods, the final product also should match with that sample. And the next condition is you must give the buyer a reasonable opportunity to compare the bulk with the sample. So take for example, there is a buyer, I have showed him the sample. Now I say, okay, you cannot open the rice bag. You have to just take them home like that. No, we have to give an opportunity to the buyer to check whether the sample and the actual products are same or not. Next, one important condition is the goods must not have latent defects. Latent defects means, see, sometimes what happens, certain defects are not visible just by checking them, touching them, or by seeing them. These defects are only visible, or these defects only surface after we start using them. Such kind of defects are called latent defects. So whenever you're selling goods by sample, right, you have to make sure that the goods are free from such kind of defect, right? So those are the three conditions that are applicable for sale by sample. The next is condition in case of sale by description and sample. See, sometimes goods are first a description is given, then a sample is given. So the final bulk should match both with the description as well as the sample. Okay. Next, condition as to merchantable quality. Merchantable quality means the quality and condition of goods must be such that a man of ordinary prudence would accept them as the goods of that description. So, you know, you go to a particular shop which sells goods of some particular quality. So whatever goods there that are being sold to you at this point of time also should match up with that quality. That is known as merchantable quality. Quality and condition according to the normal acceptable standards. Then the next one is condition as to wholesomeness. This is applicable to eatables. So eatables or provisions or foodstuffs, those goods should be fit for human consumption. So milk should be fit for human. Milk should not be spoiled. Grains or pulses should not have worms in them, because then they're not fit for human consumption. So any goods, any eatables, any provisions, any food items you are buying, and if those food items are not fit for human consumption, then it means that the condition has not been fulfilled, and you can actually terminate the contract. You can reject the entire contract. Right? Then these were all conditions what we discussed. Now let us look at warranties. What is the difference between conditions and warranties? I told you, if there is a breach of condition, if condition is not fulfilled, the contract can be terminated. If a warranty is not fulfilled, the buyer can only claim for damages. Okay. So what are some of the implied conditions? What are some of the implied warranties? Warranty as to quiet possession. That means whoever has bought the goods, the buyer, will have, quiet possession of the goods. That means nobody will come and disturb that person. That is the implied warranty. Warranty as to quiet possession. Then warranty of freedom from encumbrances. That means the goods are free from any charge or encumbrance in favor of any third person. So the buyer is the sole owner of those goods and he can enjoy it from any encumbrances. Right? Next topic that we need to understand is transfer of ownership. What is transfer of ownership? Transfer of ownership is not merely the transfer of physical possession, right? But the actual transfer of ownership. Why do we need to understand this transfer of ownership or transfer of property? See, the time of transfer of ownership of goods This determines a lot of rights and liabilities of the seller and the buyer. So, for example, goods have been damaged. Goods have been damaged. The goods are in transit and they have been damaged. So, who will bear the risk? The answer to this is the owner of the goods will bear the risk. The answer is not buyer or seller, but the owner of the goods. So, who is the owner at that point of time? The transfer of ownership will tell us. So, whoever is the owner of the goods, that person will bear the risk. And who will take action against the third party? Take, for example, the goods are in transit and goods have been damaged because of the carelessness of the courier company. Who can take action against the third party? The buyer or the seller? No, that is not the question. That is not the answer. Who will take action against the third party? The owner will take action against the third party. And how do we know who is the owner? Only by knowing the exact time of transfer of ownership. And who can sue for price? Right? Again, whoever is the owner. Right? So all these things are very, very important. And in case of, take for example, a buyer has been declared insolvent. Right? A buyer has been declared insolvent. Now, the official receiver or the assignee, can he take possession of goods from the seller? Yes, he can if transfer of ownership has taken place. Similarly, in case a seller has been declared insolvent, can the buyer take the possession of goods from the official receiver or assignee? Again, the answer is if the ownership has goods has been transferred. So therefore, understanding the time of transfer of ownership is very, very important. So let us try to understand transfer of ownership in case of ascertained goods and unascertained goods. We've already discussed what are ascertained and what are unascertained goods. So ascertained goods are those goods which exist at the time of entering into the contract. So there are few sections which deal about transfer of property in case of ascertained goods. The first one is section 19. It says property when intended to pass. That means whenever the parties agree, the buyer and the seller, whenever they agree for transfer of property to take place, that is when the transfer of property would take place, when they intend to pass. Similarly, specific goods in deliverable state. So, whenever the contract is entered into, A goes to a shop, he selects a mobile phone, or he selects a TV, a television. He selects a TV, a particular model of TV, and he tells the TV owner, the shop owner, the seller, this is the model that I want to buy. You send it to my home. When will the transfer of property take place? Immediately, whenever they both, the person and the store owner, whenever they enter into an agreement, transfer of property takes place. Sometimes specific goods have to be put into a deliverable state. For example, I have bought a smart television. I went to a shop, I bought a smart television, I have selected a model and everything, I've paid for it. But I told the store owner that something, for example, operating system needs to be installed in that smart television. So I tell the store owner, after the operating system is installed, you please deliver it to my place. When will I become the owner? After it is put into deliverable state. That means after the operating system is installed in it, then I become, that is, the buyer becomes the owner. As long as that operating system is not installed, that television is not in a deliverable state and the buyer does not become the owner. Then there are some specific goods which are in a deliverable state, but the seller has to do something to ascertain the price. So, for example, furniture. Furniture has been sold, but they have to be assembled at the house of the buyer. So, till that is done, transfer of property does not take place. So, the furniture shop owners would send people, they will come to our house, they'll sit there, they will assemble it. Only after the assembly is done, transfer of ownership takes place. Okay. Now, what is the law talk about goods that are sent on approval or on sale or return basis? So, on sale or return basis, that means seller sends some goods to the buyer. He says, you check this. If you want, you take it, or if you don't like them, you return it. Right? Now, when does the buyer become the owner? When does the proper transfer of property take place? Whenever the buyer signifies his approval or acceptance to the seller, either through words or through actions. So, take for example, I am a buyer, right? So, somebody has sent me a dining table. They say, I'm sending you a dining table. You check whether you like it. If you don't like it, you send it back to me. So, the moment I receive the dining table, I tell that delivery person, okay, I liked it, I will keep it. This is what, so I'm very clearly through words I'm telling. Sometimes I don't tell the delivery person anything. I say, okay, you keep it in my house and you go away. And I start using that dining table. What am I doing? I am signifying my approval or my acceptance through my words. So the moment I send that person back and started using the dining table, I become the owner. Okay. Next is sale by non-owners. See, I told you goods can only be sold by owners. That is people who have the title of that particular product. Those who own it, those who have the title only can transfer the title to somebody else. But there are certain instances where people other than the owner, people who do not have the title to that particular product also can sell those products. Which of those situations? Sale by an agent, right? Uh, there is one person who's acting as an agent of X. So he does all the sales on behalf of X. So in this case, the agent can sell goods on behalf of X, though he does not own the product, because there is that kind of mutual agreement or understanding between that X and the agent. So that is one scenario. Another scenario is joint owners. Sometimes when property or goods are owned by more than one person, then one of the joint owners can sell the property. And if the buyer buys it in good faith, then he becomes the owner. That is the transfer of property will take place. Then sale by a person who is in possession under a voidable contract. So take for example, I bought a table from somebody, but I say that I bought it under coercion. That means I am having it, but under a voidable contract. Till we do not, resign or cancel that contract, I can sell it to the other party, and if the other party buys it in good faith, then they become the owners. Right? Next one is sale by a person who has already sold the goods but continues to have possession. So I sold goods to X first, then now I am selling the same goods to Y. Now, will Y become the owner of those goods? Yes, Y will become the owner of those goods if Y has bought it in good faith. That means Y is not aware of me selling the goods to X also. If Y buys it, yes, then Y becomes the owner of the product. Then sale by a buyer obtaining possession before the property in goods has vested in him. Again, same thing. I bought goods from X. Transfer of ownership has not yet happened, but now I have sold it to Y. Before I own it, before transfer of ownership has taken place, I am selling it to Y. Will Y become the actual owner? Yes, Y will become the actual owner only if he has bought it in good faith and he is not aware of all the previous dealings. Right? So these are the rules as far as sale by non-owners is concerned. Now, let us look at some of the rules regarding delivery of goods. So what are the rules regarding delivery of goods? The seller must deliver the goods according to the contract. So at the time of entering the contract, if there was some agreement made on the as to how the goods will be delivered, where, which place, what time, then the seller must follow all those things, right? If take for example, there was no such agreement where it could be delivered, when it could be delivered, who would deliver it. Such kind of, take for example, clauses were not there in the agreement. Then the seller must deliver during regular working hours on a working day at the place where the agreement is done or at the place of usual business of the buyer. Such kind of thing. Okay. Then another rule regarding delivery of goods is the seller should deliver the goods when the buyer applies for delivery. That is, it is the duty of the buyer to claim delivery. Whenever buyer asks for delivery, the seller should deliver the goods. One more important thing is the goods must be in a deliverable state at the time of delivery. It is the responsibility of the seller to make sure that the goods are in a deliverable state. So if they have to be packed, if they have to be covered, whatever it is. It is the responsibility of the seller to make sure that all those things are made taken care of. Right. So I told you place of delivery, time of delivery, all those things are usually stated in the contract. If they are not stated, then it usually during working hours on a working day, and such kind of things have to be followed. Right. Okay. Now let us look at what are the duties of a seller. Right. We will look at duties of a seller, duties of a buyer, rights of a seller, and rights of a buyer. So what are the duties of the seller? It is a responsibility of the seller to make sure that transfer of ownership of the goods takes place. And then it is also the responsibility of the seller to determine and align the goods to the sale contract, ascertaining the goods, what are the goods, ascertainment of the goods, and making sure that these goods align with the contract that was entered into. That is the responsibility of the seller. Right? And whatever requirements were entered into as far as delivery of the goods is concerned, right? Where it would be delivered, how it would be delivered, in which state it would be delivered, all those things also, that is the responsibility of the seller. Right? Then it is again one very important duty of the seller to make sure that goods are fulfilling all the implied and express conditions or warranties. Right? We discussed all the conditions and warranties. So it is the responsibility of the seller to make sure that all those express and implied conditions and warranties are being fulfilled as far as those goods are concerned. Right? Then again, goods have to be delivered on time, within a reasonable time, and he has to till the goods are in a deliverable state or whatever costs have to be incurred, all of them have to be taken care of by the seller only. And one more thing is, whenever goods are being sent, that means goods are put in transit, it is a responsibility of the seller to inform the buyer. Right? So these are the duties of the seller. Now let us try to understand what are the duties of the buyer. Right? First and foremost duty of a buyer is to accept the delivery of the goods. Now the seller wants to sell the goods, but the buyer does not want. No, it is the responsibility of the buyer to accept the delivery of the goods. And he has to make payment, that price, the price that has to be paid by the seller, right? And he should see, he cannot ask for goods to be delivered at an unusual time, right? At a normal time. So take for example, I have ordered something today, tomorrow itself I can't be demanding, or tomorrow early morning 6 o'clock or late night 11 o'clock, such kind of things, demands a buyer cannot be making. And sometimes during transit, right, there could be a risk of deterioration. In spite of taking all the precautions, there might be sometimes risk of deterioration while the goods are in transit. So the buyer has to accept them if the transit distance is very long. Right? And if the buyer is not accepting the goods. So whatever losses the seller has to incur, all those losses have to be taken care by the buyer. So for example, 100 quintals of rice a seller has bought from me. Now I've called up the seller and said, Tulsi, today I'm sending it. You will get the rice by today evening. So the buyer says, no, I don't want it today. I want it after 2 days. Now, for storing these 100 quintals of rice for 2 days, I might be incurring some costs. All those costs have to be taken care of. All those costs have to be paid by the buyer only. Okay. Next one is rights of the seller under the Sale of Goods Act. So, to reserve the right to dispose of the goods until certain conditions are met. That means, certain conditions have to be fulfilled. If those conditions are not fulfilled, then the seller need not send the goods to the buyer, he can dispose it, right? And one very important right that the seller has is until the purchase price is paid, he can assert a lien. He can maintain the ownership of the items. That kind of contract can be entered into. So till I get the complete price, I will continue to be the owner. I will not give you the products till I get the complete purchase price. That kind of arrangement also can be done. Right? And sometimes in some conditions, the goods could be resold also. Right of an unpaid seller, right? What are the rights that an unpaid seller has? That means he has not yet got the payment, the purchase price. He has not yet got the purchase price. What right does he have? He has the right of lien, right? What do you mean by right of lien? Right of lien means the right to retain possession of goods. So, for example, I told you, some person has bought 100 quintals of rice from me, right? If that person has not paid the price, then I can say I will not give these or I will not send these 100 quintals of rice till I get the money. So, when does a seller have this right of lien? Only in 3 conditions. When there is no stipulation as to credit. That means the seller is liable to deliver the goods to the buyer when demanded by the buyer, but he has no right to have possession of the goods till he pays the price. Right? But whereas if a sale is made on credit, right? If a sale is made on credit, and so during the period of credit, the unpaid seller cannot operate his right of lien. And one more thing is if the buyer becomes insolvent, right? If the buyer becomes insolvent before the price is paid, before actually paying the price, the buyer has become insolvent. Then the seller, if he is in possession of goods, he is entitled to retain possession even if the goods are sold on credit and the terms of the credit have not expired. So only when the buyer is becomes insolvent, then this condition is applicable, right? So first one is right of lien. Second one is right of stoppage of goods in transit. Even when they are in transit, he can stop the goods. He can stop the transit of the goods. Right? Next, coming to the rights of the buyer. What are the rights of the buyer? The rights of the buyer are to receive the items in accordance with the contract. Whatever was entered into, whatever terms and conditions were entered into the contract, the buyer has the right to receive the items in accordance with that. Right? And the buyer has the right to reject the goods if the goods don't match with the specifications that were given in terms of the description, quality or quantity. For example, I ordered for 100 quintals of basmati rice, but I got 100 quintals of Sona Masuri rice. That means the actual product is not matching with whatever specification was made at the time of entering into the contract. Then I can reject the goods. And then if the goods are being given in installments, though there was no agreement to such effect. So, for example, I ordered for 100 quintals of rice, and at the time of entering into the contract, there was no agreement or understanding about sending the rice in installments. But whereas the seller, after the agreement is entered into, is now only sending 10 quintals of rice, then I can reject the contract, right? And then every buyer should be given an opportunity to inspect the goods, check the goods, and determine whether they match with the contract or not, right? That is also a right that a buyer has, right? And if in case the seller did not deliver the goods, a buyer also has the right to file a lawsuit against the seller in order to get his money back, right? And a buyer also can bring a specific performance claim against the seller. That means whatever was entered into the contract, the same thing I need to get. That this is what the buyer can demand, right? These are some of the rights of the buyer. Then coming to the auction sale. What is an auction sale? An auction sale is like there is some item which many people want, and the price of that item is determined by the demand that that item has based on different people. And as you know, the pricing starts from lowest to highest. So why are we talking about auction sale and sale of goods act is, when is sale complete in an auction sale? So you must be aware that, in an auction sale, take for example, if I'm the auctioneer, I said, see, I have this vintage jewelry for 1 crore rupees. This is the reserve price. So somebody says, no, we'll buy it for 2 crores. Somebody says, no, we'll buy it for 3 crores. So when can we say that the sale is complete? The sale is complete. See, there is something called as fall of the hammer in an auction. So whenever the auctioneer hits the hammer, or the fall of the hammer takes place, that point is the point where sale is complete. That means the bid is accepted and the property in goods passes to that buyer at that time. So buyer X said 2 crores, buyer Y said 3 crores, buyer Z said 4 crores. And after buyer Z said 4 crores, the auctioneer hits the hammer. This is the point of sale. So the bid is accepted for 4 lakhs, and at this point, property in goods passes to that buyer Z. Right? So this is about contract of sale. So these are the various points in it. Right? So with this, I would like to end this session. Tomorrow, unit 4 would be discussed, which is industrial laws and relations. Okay. So see you again tomorrow at 8 p.m.